The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.
Yeah, so oftentimes, extreme events come through and then the system doesn't perform the way it was intended. And the asset owner wants to know what went wrong. The insurance company wants to know what went wrong. So they'll send racking experts like Chris and I out, and we will walk the site and look for forensic evidence that points to the failure modes that ultimately led to what is often catastrophic destruction when it comes to hurricanes. So,
are you speeding the energy transition? Here at the Clean Power Hour, our host Tim Montague bring you the best in solar, batteries, and clean technologies every week. Want to go deeper into decarbonization? We do too. We're here to help you understand and command the commercial, residential, and utility solar, wind, and storage industries. So let's get to it. Together we can speed the energy transition.
Today on the Clean Power Hour, extreme weather and technical due diligence that you can do on solar products, solar projects. I'm Tim Montague. Check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. My guest today is Frank Oudheusden and Chris Needham. They are the principals of Azimuth Advisory Services, a company that does a whole variety of things, which we'll get into around due diligence. It boils down to technical due diligence of various flavors, but they are racking experts. And so when things go wrong on solar farms, they are either helping you prevent that thing go wrong or figuring out why that thing went wrong. But welcome to the show, guys.
No, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Tim.
Looking forward to this very much. And why don't you guys give us a brief introduction to yourselves? How did you come together? How did you get interested in the solar industry? And then give us a cliff notes on what you're up to in the world.
Yeah, so my name's Frank Oudheusden, as Tim mentioned. I've been in solar since 2008. I started at SunEdison, which was a large solar power developer who went bankrupt in 2016. I met Chris while at SunEdison. He and I sat together in the bullpen, and we developed racking systems inside SunEdison and ran technical due diligence for that company for almost a decade for their projects globally. When they went bankrupt, Chris and I formed a partnership, and we've been consulting together ever since. My background's actually manufacturing engineering. Chris, I'll let you do your intro.
Pretty much everything Frank said, but I started at SunEdison in 2007 instead. Background in aerodynamics.
Cool. Yeah. For our listeners who are not familiar, SunEdison was one of the early providers of power purchase agreements. Jigar Shah was one of the founders of that company. So they really made a mark in the solar industry for a period of time before things went south. But great company, and many OG solar professionals can date their experience to SunEdison. They were like the first major force in solar companies in the U.S. But so solar racking, why did you guys gravitate to that space? Why? I mean, I happen to be a geek for racking, but it's not the sexiest part of solar. It is a very important part. It holds the solar panels, hopefully, and tilts them towards the sun or tracks them. But what's so special about racking for you guys?
I'll go.
Yeah,
I'll go first. Yeah, we'll alternate, I guess. I like solar racking because it's the framework for solar. It's easy to ignore it. It's easy to think of it as 4 pieces of steel that just hold a solar panel, but really it affects every aspect of the architecture. It affects how much power you make, when you make the power, whether the system costs a whole bunch or a little. It's kind of the key component and definitely an underdog in the solar industry.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of that. I've always seen it as kind of the interface to the customer, right? It's the thing that holds all of the wiring and the and the modules, oftentimes inverters if you're using micro or string inverters. So it's not quote unquote the reason for the season, but it does interface either with the land and thus the landowner, or with the roof and the roof owner. And so it is the interface with the customer. And so it takes into account pretty much every aspect of the environment in which you want to install these systems, as well as every piece of the LCOE calculation that makes it valuable.
Yeah, I think as my more established listeners know, you've got fixed tilt, which is the probably for rooftop, absolutely the most common. And then for ground mount, you have fixed tilt or tracker. And now you have also systems like Oudheusden and PEG. Oudheusden is flat to earth. PEG is a east-west low-to-ground system. So there's a variety of systems, but trackers, for example, are a huge percentage, perhaps 96%, you guys would know better, of the large-scale solar for ground mount. And you're getting maybe 10 to 15% more energy out of that by using a tracker. But as we've discussed in our meetings prior to this, there's a grand experiment happening in the solar industry by installing these, for example, single axis trackers en masse, because we don't truly know how they're going to perform over decades. We know that, they can do the job in the short term. And then there's these wild cards of extreme weather, like hailstorms, like hurricanes, like tornadoes. And in the recent hurricane in Florida, there was tornadoes and hurricane at the same time. A hurricane can spawn tornadoes, and that's just a horrifying thought. I feel bad for those people that had to experience that.
When I saw the news, I asked whether or not the next one was going to be on fire and throwing sharks everywhere. It is absolutely terrifying. Yeah.
Well, yeah, right. But let's talk about some of your experiences, triaging these extreme weather events. What exactly do you get hired to do when it relates to solar power plants and extreme weather?
Yeah, so oftentimes, extreme events come through and then the system doesn't perform the way it was intended. And the asset owner wants to know what went wrong. The insurance company wants to know what went wrong. So they'll send racking experts like Chris and I out, and we will walk the site and look for forensic evidence that point to the failure modes that ultimately led to what is often catastrophic destruction when it comes to hurricanes. So we've been on many sites in which this has happened, and we wrote white papers on it as early as 2018 and 2020, entitled Solar Under Storm 1 and Solar Under Storm 2. Solar Under Storm 1 was written in conjunction with the Rocky Mountain Institute and NREL, and it focused on fixed tilt ground mounts. A lot of the lessons learned could be shared across all the different platforms that Tim mentioned. And then Solar Under Storm 2 focused on rooftop systems, both residential and commercial flat roof. And so we've been trying to evangelize throughout the industry that the need for storm hardening measures, especially in areas that see extremely high wind. Obviously, hail is a large topic more recently, but wind is ever present and ever prevalent. So we go to these sites, we look for forensic evidence, we write, we do failure mode and effects analysis, and we write technology assessments and failure assessments for asset owners.
And then I'll throw in the one type of racking I failed to mention is floating solar. And I was just talking to D3, a developer that does nothing but floating solar, about a project they had that went through the hurricane recently and survived without any catastrophic failure. So that was interesting to hear. And of course, floating solar is very low to ground. It's basically like, you can think of it as flat roof solar, but floating on the water. But it has a unique racking system. In the U.S., the most common floating racking is Terre, the French company.
And Chris and I have been very fortunate to work in floating when we were at SunEdison, and over the last 10 years, it's just grown tremendously in its market share. I would also add to that list carports. I think carports are kind of a unique beast of the racking world, and they break a lot of the rules that I think what we would consider to be behind the meter systems need to follow. So, we're now hanging 1500 volt power generation equipment over people and property, and it's in the public eye. Aesthetics come into play, and a little more safety factor. So, carports are growing quickly, and we're big supporters of them. But they are a unique platform.
What are your thoughts on how well the industry is doing in terms of, generally what's happening is people are designing products that meet certain specifications and can pass certain certifications like UL certification. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that landscape. But how well are we doing? Is it good, bad, or ugly?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. It really depends on the platform, and it really depends on the project location and the goal. So I would say the march towards larger format modules is ever continuing. When Chris and I started in solar, a 170 watt panel was a little bit bigger than maybe 1.2 meters by 1 meter wide. Today, panels are the size of a sheet of plywood. And those larger panels are coming with ever smaller frames and ever smaller glass, significantly less rigidity, and the racking systems that support them are being tasked with providing that rigidity in lieu of less glass and less frame. So, in certain platforms like fixed tilt, I think they do a pretty good job of providing that rigidity. And in other platforms, it is an ongoing question as to under what conditions large format modules are performing. So, there's a lot of innovation happening in the world of module mounting and racking.
So I'll add to that. I'll say in terms of good in our career, the industry has gotten very good at really understanding the underlying physics of the loading that goes into a solar system. They've gotten very good at optimizing around that. When we began, nobody even did a wind tunnel test for the most part, or it was kind of a rare bird. And now the level of sophistication, particularly in the tracker world with wind tunnel testing and the aerodynamics is amazing. And they've really driven a lot of cost out. Where the industry absolutely needs to improve is in building in resiliency. So these systems are designed as though basically everything goes right. Every bolt doesn't have a backup. This component doesn't have a backup. So what happens, frequently in our investigations is we find what are called cascading or progressive failure modes, where one little bolt breaks, and then that leads to a chain reaction that can take out, a lot bigger part of the array than what that bolt originally supported. So that's something that the industry should get better at.
Can you explain that a little more, Chris?
Yeah, sure. A good example is like top-down clamps on systems. And so when we did the solar under storm reports, we found that in a lot of instances, what happened was modules would share a top-down clamp. And so you'll have a whole row of solar that might go 50 panels, say, that all have individual clamps that are shared, and then two at the end. And then the next row has 50, and the next row has 50, like this. And what happens is a piece of debris comes along and it hits a panel on the first row. And nobody's going to design for that. Nobody should design for that. That panel should be sacrificed. If a tree hits it, or a piece of a cooling shroud we found in the middle of an array once hit it, it doesn't make sense to design it to survive that. The problem is that one or a few panels lets go. We call them panel liberations in our parlance, and they fly downwind. And that one panel hits one group of 50 over here, and the next panel hits a group of 50 over here. And then once you lose a panel from that bunch, it just unzips. The clamps, which are designed to be shared, aren't shared anymore. There's a hole on one side. So the whole thing pulls out like a zipper, and now I got 50 panels going down. So it's a geometric failure mode. And we found instances where we can clearly document this panel was lost, and then like 300 panels downwind wind. So there are ways to design those failures. Think of it like throwing a wet blanket over it. Yeah, you lose that module or that group, but you mitigate the failure. And that's the kind of resiliency the industry needs to get better at.
So a recommendation that we've made is for individual modules to have individual clamping systems, not shared clamping systems, or for modules to be direct bolted so that they are individually fastened to the racking system. We've advocated for vibration-resistant hardware, which we've seen introduced across the Caribbean, where our reports have been read the most. And recently we're on some hurricane barrel sites where, we found, vibration-resistant fasteners performed quite well. So, people are learning these lessons either through attrition or through reading the types of documents that Chris and I like to publish with the Rocky Mountain Institute, and they're getting better in that regard.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more. How many types of failure are there? Let's just talk about trackers because they are such a huge part of the ground mount industry or the utility scale industry. Because I can just think of a couple, like the tracker can break and stop tracking. The module can fly off. The module can crack, or the cells in the module can crack. Those are the three main things I think of, but what are the failures and how much of this is covered or not by insurance that an asset owner has?
Yeah, so you'd have to follow the load path through the entire system, right? So you could buckle your module rails and they could fold over. You could buckle your torque tube. You could pancake, right? Fall over sideways from lateral loading, wind pushing you over. There's lots of different ways that a system like a tracker could fail. There's a lot of moving components. Slew drives can shred, journals can slip. There's lots of different ways that these complex systems can feasibly fail. Whether or not insurance covers it is a complicated question that goes to how the system was supposed to perform versus how it actually performed. And so in the case of hurricanes, many times systems were designed to take, say, a Category 3 hurricane of a certain amount of wind, and then they got hit by a Category 5 hurricane. That's a situation that we can clearly point to as a force majeure event, and typically insurance comes into the room and pays the insurance payout. In other instances, we've seen, even with trackers, Category 1 hurricane comes through, which typically has top 3-second gust in the 90-mile-an-hour range, and the system was supposed to survive to 105, and absolutely insurance is not going to pay for that failure. So that usually results in a litigation, right? The ability for the racking OEM or the desire for the racking OEM to fix an entire project, including broken modules and the labor and all of the things to remediate, that results in a litigation. So that's unfortunately not uncommon when those failures don't line up with the design parameters of the project.
I'll add to that. There are, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of ways for a plant to fail. When you get down to the ultimate cause, what was the thing that pushed it over the limit? And I think Frank and I probably find dozens of unique ones on every failure analysis we do, at least. But an idea that we should all have is that as you are cutting out the fat of a system, as you're reducing the safety factor of a system, there are failure modes that used to be protected, failure modes that we as an industry didn't understand, that used to be protected by those safety factors. And as we continue to march down and cut costs from the system, we open ourselves up to learning what those failure modes we were protected from are. And so we're at that point in the industry, I think.
I don't quite understand that point being what?
Sorry. The point where we've cut so much fat from the systems that we're discovering and learning new failure modes. So for example, fatigue loading of connections is a big point of interest right now, and something that's being studied in the industry. And if you were simply designing to code prescribed load, say 10 years ago, maybe your bolt size was 50% bigger in diameter. And that bolt was not stressed as high. And so it didn't have fatigue failures, things like that.
Got it. Got it. So, I want to shine a light on some areas that are going to be most valuable for my audience of solar professionals, developers, asset owners. So where should we go from here? We've kind of set the table, and there's these trade-offs being made between the cost to build any particular system and how long it will last under real life conditions. And then there's this uncertainty of conditions are changing because climate is changing. Storms are bigger, more frequent. But what matters most to solar professionals?
So if you're talking utility scale projects, right, generally, I would say it bifurcates into two camps. There are developers who sell the project at the end of the day, and there are developers who own and operate their projects for the lifetime of their projects. And I would say the developers who own and operate the stuff that they develop, they do a much better job of focusing on LCOE. And LCOE is a metric that encapsulates both cost and the long-term operating O&M cost of these systems. And so as the industry grows, I think it's most important to start to bring in costs that are externalized, things like O&M, things like module cleaning, things like vegetation abatement, things like corrosion checks and torque checks, and all of the things that are in the install manual that we should be doing should be brought forward as a net present value to that forward cost. And that would stop a lot of people from buying what is the cheapest racking available, just in terms of upfront cost, and we would ultimately make better systems because you'd be taking into account the long-term costing.
Yeah, of course.
I think it's also important to start thinking more regionally. A lot of people, just have the opinion that tracker is the answer in a lot of instances. And while tracker is often the answer, it might not be the best answer for Southern Florida, for example.
Yeah.
Whereas it could be a great, answer for the desert in Nevada. Considering the regional differences in terms of climate, I think is going to become more and more important in the future.
Yeah, well, let's talk about extreme weather areas in the U.S. We have the hurricane zone in the south. This is Texas, Florida, and then up the Atlantic coast. We have the hail zone. Just published an interview with VDE on hail, and that's a huge swath of the Great Plains that's impacted by hail. But if you're designing for high wind, let's say in the Caribbean or in Florida, my gut tells me, hey, go to some form of fixed tilt, and maybe go to a low to ground like a peg, which is very high ground cover ratio, low to ground, or an eartho system. What are you guys seeing in the projects that you're visiting? Are any of these emerging technologies getting applied yet?
Yeah. No, go ahead, Chris.
No, I say your intuition is in the right ballpark for sure. I would change it a little bit and say, for projects expect to see, more extreme hurricane events, wind events, focus more on resiliency than you might for a project that doesn't. Now, that could look like any of the sort of novel solutions you've outlined, or it could just look like, the belt and suspenders approach to the typical fixed tilt design you might otherwise do. We laid out a configuration for a dual post system with through bolting with nylock fasteners and solar under storm to kind of prescribe that exact thing, to give people something that had some resiliency built in.
Why nylon?
They're vibration resistant if they're not installed perfectly, or for some reason things loosen up over time. Basically, the nylock holds the nut in place just long enough for it to corrode to the bolt. And so we've just sort of anecdotally over our career found that nylock nuts don't come off. It's
Oh, but so
About as
so
much
what?
science
Yeah,
as
explain
that.
exactly what a nylock bolt is.
Yeah, a nylock nut is a brand name term for a nylon insert that basically binds to the thread on the nut. You could also say Loctite or any other kind of solution, but the idea is something that's vibration resistant if it's not installed perfectly.
Got it. Got it.
I'll also add, Tim, to the east-west architecture or flat-to-ground architectures. Right, we've seen these types of systems, not those specific systems, but systems with east-west architecture fail in the Caribbean, and so they're not immune to the same lack of resiliency that we've seen on a typical south-facing fixed tilt per se, or a single axis tracker. So, regardless of what system or system architecture is being installed, I think the same tenets apply,
Mm-hmm.
and specifically with ones that are trying to get an aerodynamic benefit, like anything that uses an east-west architecture. There are going to be wind tunnel boundary conditions in which that system is applicable, and one of those is topography and undulating terrain, and specifically in the Caribbean, you're going to have a very hard time finding large swaths of very flat land, and so uh, asset owners and designers need to be cognizant that these types of solutions require very specific types of project conditions. And if they're applicable, they're great. And if they're not applicable, then they shouldn't be shoehorned in because you think they're going to be better when it comes to handling wind forces. So as with most things in engineering, it depends.
And I think of two main ways of attaching panels to racking. There's clamping right from the top or bolting. Is bolting a minority of the installations happening, and is it that much more expensive to bolt panels to the racking?
There's a few others out there. There's certainly Huck bolts, which are a brand of kind of rivet that get used prevalently on single axis trackers. There are clips that are made by companies like A. Raymond or Vesper that are made to retain modules. There's lots of different. There's slide-in module rails, which are most prevalent on solar carport solutions. So there's a lot of different module innovations flying around the industry right now. Which one is best for which type of project and which project location is the type of questions that people should be asking when they do technical due diligence in sourcing these systems, which is what Chris and I work with large developers on doing, right? They want to sit down with their portfolio, look at all of their projects slated over the next 6 quarters, and they want to ask themselves, what's the best architecture and the best product and company to service my boutique portfolio? And because we know the technologies and the players and the people, we're able to create a short list with them. And then we go product by product doing technical due diligence, and we check things like module pressures and stow angles and types of foundations, matching geotechs and module mounting solutions and speed and all of these things. So these are the types of questions that developers should be asking if they want to really address LCOE.
Yeah, there's always this tension between making the construction more affordable, faster, and then making it also reliable over the long term. And oftentimes the short-term price reduction wins. But what else should our listeners know? Like, okay, if you're doing large-scale solar, hire you guys to vet the technology that you're planning to use or thinking about using, right, and then make adjustments. Is it that simple?
Yeah, I think getting experts involved early is always best, whether that's us as racking experts or others in the world of power electronics or module selection. I think those are equally powerful things to do before you go sourcing OEM parts for gigawatts or hundreds of megawatts of plants.
Mm-hmm.
I think at the end of the day, being able to proliferate lessons learned and not repeat your mistakes is another way to go, and continuously improve. So this is where forensic engineering on field problems is extremely helpful to especially mid-size and large-size organizations. I would say installation speed is another trend that we're seeing in the industry. We're seeing a lot of construction automation come into the market. And the question that our developer clients always have is, speed is great, but can I get the cost reduction, the labor cost reduction from my EPC? And this is where I think having a great partnership with an EPC and an actual installer and somebody who's going to be bidding your construction allows you to do trade-offs with upfront cost and speed and long-term O&M. So, for people that are purely developing, that are bringing the financing to the party and hiring an EPC, right? All of these different pieces trade off with one another. There's very few free lunches left in solar.
I guess I have a little bit of a fantasy. I mean, I love what you said about if you're doing a lot of construction, find good partners and go deep and long in that. I also think of just kind of settling on bulletproof designs. Like, let's say you do a lot of work where there's a probability of a hurricane or tornado. Why not just figure it out, so to speak, and say, okay, we're not going to do a module above a certain format. We're going to do this type of attachment. We're going to use this type of racking. Do you see this kind of logic, or am I just kidding myself and there's just too much bespokeness to the solar industry still?
If you made all of the decisions in the name of resiliency, you just wouldn't be cost competitive. Like, that's the honest economic answer. Mm-hmm. So the reality that Chris and I live in every day is how do we find the belt and suspenders solutions that cost very little but turn off progressive and cascading failure modes, right? What's the smallest insurance premium you can pay for the largest coverage? And so those are the types of recommendations that we make to our clients. Those are the types of things we look for in project reviews. Those are the types of things that we try to proliferate through forensic engineering and due diligence, because those are ultimately the things that are near free that people can institute and just make their projects infinitely more resilient. So, I think that's where the industry should really be focused. And then as we raise that bar, and everybody has to meet a certain level of resiliency, that the whole industry just gets better together.
I would say in the immediate term, before the bar is raised, people doing a failure modes and effect analysis study on their projects is money very well spent. Whoever they get to do that, but an FMEA is very good value. And then making sure that the loading that the system actually sees is well understood is something that a lot of research is happening on right now.
So, I mean, there's always going to be natural disasters, and for the foreseeable future, they're going to get worse until we get serious about removing carbon from the atmosphere, which at this time we're still dabbling around the edges, unfortunately. But in the next 10 years, are we, in your guys' opinions, are we trending the right direction in terms of large scale developers using services like yours and making good decisions about what they're installing for the LCOE, or is there going to be more acceleration of this train wreck that we see?
No, I think they're largely trying to do the right thing. At the end of the day, solar is growing asymmetrically fast. These storms are becoming far more frequent, and as you mentioned, far more catastrophic. So, of course, the prevalency of solar incidences is going to go up. Like, that's just part of that math. The reality is, I think the general public outside of the solar energy space thinks of solar as somehow less resilient than everything else. And Chris and I have always kind of scratched our head to that to some extent, because I've been on a number of islands throughout the Caribbean that have gotten hit by category 4 and 5 hurricanes. And sitting next to these large scale solar power systems are diesel power plants, and they are missing cooling shrouds, and their engines are not running, and their roofs are missing. And so, resilient compared to what, like in the grand scheme of things. And so how fast can a solar power plant get back online and producing power for the people that it's meant to serve is ultimately the question. And that boils down to what percentage of the plant can be resilient to these storms. And you're never going to stop a solar panel from being broken if a pickup truck gets thrown into it. Like that's not a thing we're going to engineer away. But at the same time, we should be able to quickly activate an O&M team who owns that asset to go out there to drop a string and rewire things and get 90% of the plant operating again in a relatively short order, and then be able to make the fixes that they need to fix and get the plant back up to 100% capacity in relatively short order.
Well said. Any closing remarks, Chris?
Oh boy. No, I just appreciate the opportunity to come on here and talk resiliency. It's something we're working on getting better at.
Well, thank you. Please, if you're listening to this, go to cleanpowerhour.com and share that URL with a friend. Telling others about the show is one of the best things you can do. Give us a rating and review on Apple or Spotify. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. How can our listeners find you, Frank and Chris?
You guys can find us on LinkedIn. We also have a website at azimuth-ventures.com. You can see our publications on that website, Solar Understorm 1 and 2. We are also in the middle of writing Solar Understorm 3 with all of the findings from Hurricane Beryl in conjunction with RMI, who used to be known as the Rocky Mountain Institute. So we're looking forward to the release of that new white paper.
And when is that coming out?
We just started writing it. Beryl just came through beginning of August. Chris and I lived on a trimaran for 4 days, visiting all those islands because transportation wasn't yet available. We're hoping to have drafts completed by the end of the year and to be able to share more details probably around that time frame.
Got it. All right. Well, I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage. Take care, everybody.
Absolutely.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.